Good afternoon, Force Management Nation. How y'all doing today? Today's our next class, kind of our last formal class within the F100 block on operational contract support. I'm Jim Kennedy at Fort Belvoir, and with me today I have a special guest, a 51 Charlie himself, to provide some expertise and credibility.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me out and to be a part of this. I am Major Jarek Hunter. I'm currently on the Joint Staff J4 OCS Division. My background, I came into the 51 Charlie acquisition career field around 2011. I've got some experience doing installation contracting. I've got some experience doing contracting overseas in Afghanistan. And I've also got some experience doing contracting forward in South Korea. So I've got a pretty good broad range of experience overall. And right now I'm doing OCS at the strategic level.
Okay, very good. Let's get into this. Just forgot to do the video. We can be closer. All right, so ladies and gentlemen. All right, so these are lesson objectives up here. This is the third of your three classes on fiscal financial stewardship. This is part of. So everything in red we'll kind of talk to today. We're hitting the roles, how to do some resource management, link it to contracts that you did in your resource management class. We're going to hit organizations you can go to for help because you do know you need help, when that's fine. But we'll spend most of our time really on the planning and management of services in a contingency operation. And then we'll hit a little bit on some legal issues and concerns you need to be aware of, but always talk to your lawyer and your contracting officer who will provide much more expertise to help guide you in the right direction. So what is this OCS thing, operational contract support? There's the definition from the Joint Pub, but it is basically obtaining goods and services from the commercial industry to support what we need to do, be it planned for a mission or unplanned. And there's a quick framework here in the Joint Pub. There are three parts of it. There's a joint responsibility between the unit and the contractors. And the first two parts, or the first and third part, is contract support integration. That's where you plan what you need, from strategic down to tactical. What do I need done for contractors to do to execute your boss's mission? And the third part is contracting management, which is the oversight and the integration of those contractors into your mission. But none of that happens without contracting support. JJ?
And so the contracting support piece is where the 51 Charlie community comes in, and that's where your contracting support brigade, your contracting support battalion, and your contingency teams come into play. So, during that first phase of that, or what we call the first bucket, that's kind of where you get into the mission analysis and you begin to weave in those commercial requirements or non-organic requirements that you'll need.
And he said you, meaning the requiring activity, meaning the division headquarters, the corps, the signal brigade, not the contracting officer. They don't come into it till much later.
Yeah, but going back to that, just think of that as marbleized fat in a steak. That's kind of how you want to weave in some of those requirements. But going back to that middle bucket where the contract support, so once you've identified that requirement, that's when you meet the folks in the middle in that support bucket. And so that's where we come in and sit down with the required activity and go through that requirement and make sure that it's clear, it meets your intent or it meets the commander's intent. And then we, depending on your requirement, is how we'll decide what type of contract vehicle is best suited to support that commander.
Okay. But it's a joint effort. You can't do anything without the contracting officers. Contracting officers rely on you for the requirement. JJ, what was your basic branch?
So my basic branch, I was a chemical officer.
Okay, he's a chemo. So he's chemically dependent. Well done. But how much do you know about signal contract or signal support?
Very little.
How much do you know about base security?
Very little.
How much do you know about maintenance of technical automated or technical systems?
Very little.
How much do you know about aircraft maintenance?
Very little.
See, the point is, he's not the expert. He's the expert in obtaining the goods and services through legal means and writing a contract. You have to, because he's going to have a meeting for you about, base security. Then you have another meeting an hour later about somebody with signal support, and a meeting an hour later. He's the expert on contracting. You have to be the expert on your mission and the exact specifics of what need to be done. It's a partnership and a coalition of the willing to get the mission done. Don't rely on JJ to tell you what needs to get done. Not his job. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So OCS setting the theater, it really does. And setting the theater is a big thing for the Army right now. So we want to kind of mention where OCS fits into that. It's important to understand that you, the commanders, and your boss own this process. You're the one with the mission requirement. Contracting officers have no mission requirements. They support you. You've got the operation to conduct. You have to think about now in the future what you're going to need, not just phase 3 dominate. You have to develop your requirement, validate it, and you got to fund it. JJ has $0 to do anything. He uses, your money is used to support the contract he writes for you. And the ASCC, those are out there. You learned about those in your other classes. That's the Army Service Component Commands, the USERs, USER packs, the RSENs. They're using contracts early on and developing those to set the theater. So when operational forces arrive, things are in place. They set the policies and procedures. They're negotiating with host nation on what we can and can't do with contractors. Those are things that are in the S3 arena, the operations process, the basic branch process. That's where the majority of you come into play. JJ?
Yes. So going back to the challenges, long lead time for complex requirements. One way to deal with that or face that challenge is getting involved early and inviting the CSBs and those contracting folks into your mission analysis and decision-making cycle, so we can help at least manage expectations and provide some of that, or reduce some of that lead time. Complex requirements, you can't just turn contracts on a dime. I know there's rapidly changing requirements that need to keep up with the speed of war or speed of relevance. But with that, if we know that in advance, or if we know that during the decision process, we can create some contract vehicles to where we're able to turn things on and off, or at least move with the fighter, or give that commander that operational flexibility so he has decision space to determine how he wants to move.
Yeah. An example, with the military, you can give a different unit a different mission with an op order. That is too simple. So an artillery unit can be driving trucks in 6 hours. You can't change a contract like that. So if you need somebody else to do something, that's a challenge in contracting. That is not a challenge in uniform. Correct?
Correct.
It's just a legal difference, and you just have to accept it.
Okay. And then resource and OCS planning capabilities. Sometimes it may be a situation where you're in an austere environment and there's a capacity issue. So just that may be part of the challenge, and that's a consideration that you need to consider or think about. It's not always a contracting issue. Sometimes it's a resourcing issue depending on where you're at located in the world. Let's lose Africa for a second. There are not vendors that are readily available to provide that ability to provide that capability or capacity. So
to the standard we want.
To the standard we want. So, and the success requires, I think overall, some of the most successful contracts that I've seen boils down to really effective oversight. It's that COR surveillance that's out there ensuring that the government receives the commodities, goods, and services that the government expected. It's definitely leadership involvement. If the commander's priorities are making sure that there's capability and capacity out there, then it typically goes well. But everybody's priority tends to be the commander's priority. So if his priorities are not over contracts,
yeah,
then it could go bad.
Yeah.
But knowing and leveraging existing contracts, and then that's another opportunity to engage the contract support agency or entity in that area. Oftentimes, wherever you're operating, there is a contracting battalion or a CSB or a team providing that operations contract support. There's vehicles in place. It's just a matter of modifying or tapping into another vehicle that's pre-existing.
It's also good stewardship, because if you have two contracts, you get two overheads, etc. With one, you've got economies of scale and less overhead, so it's just cheaper as well. And so some general principles we want to talk about with OCS. The one I want to kind of hit on is the second one. It's any operations we do, you're going to have significant contractor support, be it with hauling stuff, engineering, communications, signal, intel, you name it. So you're going to have to deal with, even in humanitarian operations. Okay?
I'll hit on number 3. Command authority does not equal contracting authority. We'll get into that a little bit later, but there's a big difference between command authority and procurement authority, and understanding both will keep you safe. Mixing the two can cause a lot of problems and get you in trouble. and ultimately provide an opportunity for you to have a unauthorized commitment. So we'll talk about that later. Okay. And the last one I'd like to highlight is number 6. Again, it's getting integrated and getting the contracting folks integrated into your mission analysis and that MD&D process. Having an SME on site, look for things from our perspective and our equities will help you identify gaps, shortfalls, and even dependencies. So it's good to incorporate and bring in the contracting folks early.
Yeah, that's a great point about dependencies. While JJ is not an expert in signal or medical or any of those, he has that many contracts. He can tell you things like, do you want these guys to provide their own medical, or are you going to provide it? Do you want to feed them, or do you want them to feed themselves? Because a lot of things in contracts are consistent. He can give you a lot of advice on how you want to handle things that you just wouldn't think of. If you get an infantry platoon to provide security, you know you're going to feed them. You know how they're going to live. But with contractors, it's totally different. So that's a great point about dependencies. You really that's where the COR, where the KO, the contracting officer, can provide a lot of help and advice, and at least ask you the question of how you want to do it. That's a great one.
And then the other aspect of that is also gives us opportunity to tell you whether or not you're too dependent on a certain non-organic support or a commercial capability. Sometimes that's vital because that dependency can turn into risk, and the commander needs to know where he's assuming risk. So I'll give you an example. If you're operating in a battle space and your ISR support is 100% contracted out, that dependency could change if that environment changes from a permissive to a non-permissive environment. It's okay to have that contract support, but that commander needs to know that he is 100% reliant upon this commercial capability.
Or if the country says this company is no longer allowed to operate in our country,
yes,
which is entirely, it's their country. You are kind of stuck. That's a great point. That's why we have the expert here, ladies and gentlemen. All right, with some management principles, contractors are not part of the chain of command. You can't have them stand in formation. You can't give them direct orders. You really have to be careful. Jay's going to cover a little bit of that later. But you do have some limited authority over like force protection, security, safety, and general welfare. You can, have them follow base rules when it comes to indirect fire and where they have to go. You can control what roads they go on if they go out on missions for safety and force protection. But always remember, if you have a question, talk to your legal or talk to your KO. When in doubt, do those two things. Jay?
So I'll talk to number 3 and number 5, but first on number 3, really understanding where that line lies between command authority and procurement authority. So I'll give you a case in point. Just a simple example that you'll probably see most often. One time I was at NTC providing a Porter Johns for a certain unit out in the box. That command sergeant major from that element went out there and identified a need that the latrines needed to be moved, and it made sense. That move fell in line to the operation. Unfortunately, that command authority was exercised, and he engaged that contractor to move that latrine. What happened was there was not an opportunity for me to create a modification under that procurement authority. So really understanding that the command authority and where that procurement authority is. That procurement authority is there that deals with the obligation and commitment of federal fund of government dollars. That command authority is mission focused, but how the relationship is married is that as a contracting expert and SME, our job is to always support the commander. And what we do is we do those moves and we can make those adjustments through modifications. So really understanding as a COR, because at the end of the day, the COR is going to be the one that's going to be pressured by the commander. Yeah. Hey, COR, do this, do this, do this. And that COR just needs to understand that, hey, we can do that, but we need to exercise some of that procurement authority to make sure it's done legally.
But just remember, the guy pressuring that COR is probably the person listening to this video. You, the student, the XO, the S3, the battalion commander, have to understand that OCS is just more complicated and it's not as responsive. Accept that and don't pressure your COR when you know that some things just can't be solved quickly. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Because you are the one going to be doing it.
And then that for number 5, contract management plan, and really what it boils down to is OCS is a cross-cutting thing. I know a lot of people like to bucket it under the S4 or the G4 lane, but really we'll use interpreters, for example. If you're going to have interpreters in battle space, it's pertinent to get with that S2 or that J2 and saying, hey, we've got contractors in our battle space. How does that affect their access to operate in that battle space? Do they need access? And so really, not just making decisions in a box, but sharing that information across the staff and getting buy-in.
Not that, but the one, how you going to account for them, the three on which interpreters do you need, and the two on what do you need interpreted. Do you need translators too, or do you just need interpreters? Do you need written? Do you need spoken? Everybody's got to provide some input here. The four, where are they going to live? Who's going to feed them? How much is that going to cost? Just ask everybody. Don't leave it to one person to do. All right, so we want to talk a little bit more about the management process of how this works. So when you decide you're going to use contractors, the first one we've talked a little bit about already, the planning. That's the inherently governmental support. You got to identify any support you're going to give to them. You got to integrate them into your operations. What do you need them and when do you need them, Jay?
Yeah, and with that, it's important to account for them on how they're going to get there. If you're bringing contractors with you, is making sure they're accounted for in that TTP process. Make sure that they've got seats on a plane to come with you, because they've got to have a vehicle, some type of transportation means to get to that same battle space. And so oftentimes we expect them to be there, but we don't account for how we're going to get them there. So
or are they going to bring their own commercial planes in and do it? But even if they're doing that, they're using the same nodes that you are with your operations. They use the same airfields, rail, trucks. So you have to be able to plan all that in. And again, that goes to the 4, that goes to the 3, that goes to the 1. Everybody's got to be involved in that planning. Pre-deployment is not as big an interest if you're deployed. That's when they're getting back together. The theater tells them what clearances they need. They're doing their required training, pulling everybody together, doing all their pre-deployment stuff, very similar to a unit. And then they deploy over. When they come in, you got to do joint reception. There'll be contractors there. Spot ES tracking, so we can keep track of those. That was one of your readings. You got to deconflict your locks that we talked about a moment ago. Make sure all that's their equipment's coming in, their people, they're getting to the right place, and then it goes on to in management.
So that day-to-day support and those rules of engagement for conduct for contractors, that's just communicating, providing surveillance, understanding that PWS and what the contractor is supposed to be, how the contractors are supposed to perform, and communicating to the KO, making sure that letting the KO know that, hey, performance is going well or satisfactory, or there's some conduct issues or discipline issues that are happening out there, or the schedule slipping. So it's just that day-to-day communication and opening that line of communication up and down, left and right with, the required activity, because you may be a COR and not actually be tied to that organization that uses or generate that requirement. But being able to communicate openly with the KO and the COR so everybody has a clear understanding.
And the redeployment is, we still have it rolling now. A lot of commanders still think, oh, contract's over, bye, not my problem, wash my hands. But you, the Army, you still represent the U.S. government to make sure all those people leave or are on another contract, they're all accounted for. You're not doing it. You're checking the contract to make sure that all the people leave, all their equipment is gone, properly disposed of, government furnished property is taken back, and that all the bills are then sent up to all the proper people to pay the final bills. So it's not just over when the contract ends. That is, a lot of work has to be done prior to that and even afterwards. So OCS is an operational event. It should be no different than, doing a convoy, than doing a attack on a hill. It has to be treated in the same light. And a way to look at it is right here. They're in a brigade, everybody works for the 106 or the boss. But within OCS, as you can see on the side here, we have the warfighter or whoever it is that has the requirement, the finance people got to pay the bills, the good contracting folks like JJ and the others that were out there doing the actual legal means to get you the service, and the actual contractor themselves, the company. None of these people work for each other. It's a coalition of the willing. And there's friction points, and there's always going to be problems when you're doing these things. But if you try to think about this whole process in terms of MD&P, if you try to relate it to that, first you do your mission analysis, you get your commander's brief to make a decision, you do your development, which company do you want to go for, what exactly do you want to have them do, and you select somebody. Then there's a decision made there. You conduct the operation, which is contract administration. So that's a phase of MDMP. And then you make a decision when things are over, you don't need any more. They redeploy and recover their equipment, much like you do at MDMP or a regular operation. That's just another way to kind of look at how OCS should be looked at and treated equally, and just not blown away and given to one section. It is a commander's responsibility because the commander is responsible for the mission. JD, anything on this one?
Yeah, so again, that's incorporating a DC contracting there at the requirements generation. Most often contracting will get left out and not talked to until about that contract award time when it's that point of need. Really making sure that you incorporate and you bring in contracting during that requirements generation so we can help you through that process. We've helped many units go through how to develop a requirement, and what I see the most is people know what they want, they just don't know how to write it. Right. So though we're not an SME in that particular widget or capability that you need, we've done enough requirements to know the right questions to prod and ask you, so that way we can give you that requirement on hand.
Right. All right, so who are the units and what's the authority structure? Because like we said, command authority is not contracting authority. So there's two different sections or ways to look at this. There's the contracting side that is out there, and then there's the requirements planning and oversight. That's the other side of this whole block. So JJ?
So on the contracting side, that's the side that pretty much provides the policy, the guidance, that legal authority that they provide the contracting authority, that warrants authority for that person to go out and legally bind on behalf of the government. And then, as you scale down and look at the MIC and the CSB and CBN and the CT, that's your conduit. So that is the contracting organizations that enable that and create those vehicles to exercise those authorities.
The command authority is the Title 10 stuff. So all those green suitors and those green units are owned by AMC, but their contracting legal authority to obligate it comes from the Secretariat. It travels down.
So the CSB and the CBN and CT are the ones that actually write the contracts. Normally it's that CSB engaging that higher headquarters, trying to understand the mission set and problem set and forecast and project what requirements go down. And then that CSB will align that CBN and CTs to best support that required activity, providing that direct support and or depending if you're, depending on what AO you're in, they may be providing that regional support.
And the CTs, the contracting teams, are generally and doctrinally designed to be direct support to a BCT, but they can be direct support to a sustainment brigade. Like in the case of Ebola, they went down. They were working straight for the sustainment brigade there, or they maybe work from a signal brigade, depending on what type of thing you're doing.
And that contract of a CT is all military, and it's typically a major, a captain, and 2 NCOs, and they go out with that BCT. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing a PDSS, bring them with you. If you're doing a recon, bring them with you. The more that you have them involved, the easier it will be when it comes to developing those requirements, generating them. Generating those requirements and getting those requirements put in place.
100%. And if every CT is out there, and those people are not in the brigade working, they're in the MIC on the installation, honing their craft, just like doctors in the hospital. These guys are doing their contracting craft every day at the installation. But go and find out who that team's going to be for your brigade or your unit. Make a relationship with them. Invite them to your hail and farewells. Play golf with them. Make them part of your team. Because when the defecation hits the rotating oscillating ventilator, they are your team, and you want to know who they are and understand them. Have them at your staff calls. Make a relationship early, so when it's needed, it's already built. Fair enough? Would you agree to something like that?
I would agree, and that CT is capable of writing contracts forward and right there on the spot. So we have that capability built in that team.
But again, they're using your money, not their own money, because they have none. Okay. And then these guys in the next big box there, all those units there. They're providing the CORs, the OCS planning and management. The other this box over here is just writing contracts to support you, but you majors, you armor guys, you infantry guys, you aviation guys who all think this is not my business. Yes, you come up with the COR. You have to plan what you need. You have to manage those guys. You have to make sure it's all redeployed. The contracting guys are facilitating and helping make sure you get what you ask for, what you need.
But you are
to accomplish requirements.
Correct. You are the requirements owner.
Yeah. And
essentially, it's your program.
And you can't delegate that. You own it. All right, so several different types of contracts, Jay.
Yep. So there's several different types. You've got theater support contracts, which is if you've ever been downrange, it's that local contract on that FOB or that outpost or that camp that's providing life, basic life support, porta johns. Then they may be doing clothes washing, gravel. But typically those are provided by the CSB. And then you've also got, system support contracts, and that's generally your technical maintenance, your field service reps that are down forward that may be providing. Think of the MRAPs and those vehicles and maintenance that are conducted downrange. When you walk out, when you're downrange and you see that civilian working on the vehicle, maintaining it, typically it's a system support contractor. And a lot of those contracts are written back down at the Center of Excellence or contracting centers underneath ACC.
Yeah. Usually, generally speaking, by the LCMC, so Signal would write, the CCOM would write them, TACOM, Aviation Missile Command out of Redstone for aviation, but they're written in with the contract. Okay.
And then you've also got external support contracts, your log cap, some of these bigger type contracts, transportation security, and those are generally written by, like DLA writes their own contracts, but so it's a mixture of ACC and that agency depending on what that need is.
Yeah, DLA buys all the food and bottled water for everybody in theater. ACC writes the ones for interpreters. But INSCOM here at Fort Belvoir is requiring activity. They own the contract, but ACC writes, somebody in ACC writes that contract and manages it for them. But the kind of the key difference, theater is usually a local need written by the CSSB, kind of a shorter term, lower cost. The external is generally a worldwide type thing. It may be in your operation, but log cap can be anywhere in the world. Interpreters anywhere in the world. Security, certain types of security may be anywhere. And systems are written by somebody here in the States, but supporting worldwide for generally weapon system or technical stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the takeaway there. All right, so let's talk about this requirements process. We now decide we need contractors to do something. Doesn't matter what it is. It's generally the same process here. And that's what you want. Every ASCC is going to have a little bit different process, but this is kind of a generic one. The unit rep, whoever that is, that could be the 4, that could be the 3, it doesn't matter. Somebody's told we're going to do this, put it all together. You come up with the requirements documents, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And it's got to be staffed, as JJ said. The 2's got to look at it, the 4, the 3, the 8. How much money do we have? What are we going to do? And you also nominate a COR, and that's the commander, based on advice from the staff. Who's going to supervise this thing? The G4 gets involved with contract validation. Do we need this? Is there somebody else that can do it? So somebody at that level is getting involved with that determination. The 8 gets involved. How much money is available, depending on what type of level it is. Where can we get the money from? Because it's still your money. And that's where you're holding your requirements boards, Army requirements boards or acquisition requirements boards. But the unit, the operations people are doing that. Generally, they're chaired by the 3. And the 8 is there, the whole staff, maybe the commander or the deputy commander. But y'all just, the requiring activities doing this, deciding, yes, we want to contract for this resource and here's what it's going to do. Then it goes to the Now, the contracting folks are involved early on to make sure you get a better product. But then is when you kind of do a main effort focus over to the contracting community.
So contracting comes in, and at that point, we're going through the package, just, making sure that you got all the requisite documents. So making sure that you've got a COR identified and nominated, and then we'll go through to validate and ensure that COR gets the proper training and the education needed to execute that requirement. Also, we'll go through and look at that funding document to make sure that one, it's certified funds. Two, you're using the right color of money and the right type of funds. Typically, at your level, you're only dealing with mostly OMA. There's occasions where you may be dealing with OPA funds, and that's when you're buying a system for over $250,000. But generally, your resource manager knows what type of funding to use, and we go through to validate to make sure we don't violate any Anti-Deficiency Act type things.
Yeah.
So.
And then from there, they contract with all that unit. The unit is involved in every one of those steps. Then it goes to a vendor who accepts the contract. They start deploying, and then you've got on-site management by the COR. The rest of these steps, they're grayed out for a reason. That's all paying the bills. That's some of the things you talked about in your finance class. We're not going to get into that here because it's not the purview of this class. But you see whose responsibility lies where. Main effort is requiring activity up front. Then it goes to the contracting to actually they become the main effort, and then back to you as the main effort as the requiring activity.
Okay, so talking about documents. So you've got your IGCE, which is the government. That is your assessment. If you've gone out and done your research, saying, hey, here's what we've estimated the cost to be, kind of puts us in a ballpark for when we move forward and we go out for solicitation. That the letter of justification is just there to validate, to ensure that the commodity or maybe service that you're seeking is not inherently governmental.
And also why somebody else can't do it.
And why somebody else can do it, and why do you need it? Maybe you don't have that ability, that organic capability, and this fills the gap. So that's what the LOJ is for. It's just a second check to make sure that we're just not hitting the easy button because it's easier to contract as opposed to doing it ourselves. And then when it comes to statement of work or performance work statement, you'll coordinate with the KO. The biggest, well, I guess let me talk about that one for a second. So statement of work, performance work statement are not the same thing. Performance work statement is a performance-based, hey, I want you to cut the grass, blades need to be no longer than 2 inches, go execute. Statement of work is you're telling that person exactly how to do each and every step. So generally at the tactical level and where we operate that space, you're generally going to use a PWS.
You're going to tell them what you want done, not necessarily how to do it.
Correct.
I want the grass cut twice a week, this height, something like that, but not necessarily what machine to use.
What machine, yeah, correct. And then legal reviews, certain dollar threshold requirements require a review, not only by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, but there also may be some supplemental guidance out there in that JOA. The PRNC, again, we're just validating funds and make sure they're certified. And there's a big difference between committing and obligating. So we want to make sure that not only we have funds committed, but we've got funds that we can obligate to that requirement. And then make sure we've got a nomination packet. Understand, this is one of the biggest things I've noticed, is that a commander does not appoint. The commander will nominate a COR, and that KO will appoint. And then going through that draft QASP, making sure that you and I are talking, you as in the requiring activity, or talking to the contracting officer on, make sure we have a QASP in place to quality check that service. But the goodness in all this is that reach out to us early. What I have also noticed is that as soon as somebody gets a requirement, it gets thrown at that captain or that major, and that person is instantly overwhelmed because they, half the time they don't know what we're talking about. They've never seen this stuff. Nothing new under the sun. We've done 1 million requirements. I'm 90% confident that the item that you're about to procure is not the first. Reach out to that contracting organization early. Generally, what we'll do is we'll invite you in. We'll sit down, go through all the documents you need, and possibly, and most often, give you a sample document and work through that. The theme is communicating with the KO, communicating with that contracting organization early and often.
And then lastly, if you're going to loan any property as a government property addendum, because that's all done by the contract, not by hand receipts. And we'll talk about that later. And all of this is the responsibility of the acquiring activity, not the contracting officer. They'll help and provide guidance and assistance, but it ain't their job. It's your job. So some key relationships. This is a slide we built a while back. Students really like it. The COR is your center of gravity. And they're the ones kind of doing this thing for you, kind of the platoon leader, the commander for this, if you will, just as a linkage to something you already were aware of. The commander nominates the COR. Somebody they can handle it. You've done some readings on how to select a COR and what's the right person. The KO appoints them because the appointment is the authority. Commander doesn't have any authority to give to the COR. Only the KO does. But yet the COR works for both. The COR reports to the KO for this and to the commander how the mission is going. The COR is a manager. You can COR anything if you've got the right person, to include building a hospital, as technical as that is, or aviation. You can have a signal person COR aviation maintenance, but you may need an expert, a warrant officer, to provide that quality control and technical expertise. That's what the SME is. Together they're a team. And you may have 10 SMEs, doesn't matter. That's your technical expert. So the KO enters into a contractual obligation with a company, with a contractor, who then has a site lead on site or somewhere local that you can find to, and that site lead works for the company. Makes sense. But the COR and the contractor site lead work together. They have to coordinate with each other. They have to be aware of what's going on, and that works. The KO provides a copy of the contract to the COR because COR's got to know exactly what is the company's obligated to do. The SME and the COR use that cost to evaluate the work, and the contractor is using the performance work statement or in the contract to conduct that work. So everybody's working, but the cost is based on the contract. So that's how everybody works together in relationships. It's a coalition of the willing. Usually people get along very well together, but get that SME if you really need one. JJ?
Yeah, and so going back to that COR, the biggest thing with a COR is picking the right guy that understands, maybe that, has an understanding of what that requirement is, knows the context of that requirement, understands the importance of that requirement. The COR is not the guy in your formation that's least mission essential, if that makes any sense. So you want to pick somebody who has an understanding of what that requirement is, so you can make sure that you're getting exactly what you need.
Yeah, and at COR, it can be a first lieutenant if that person is organized, got good interpersonal skills, is reliable. They can do it. You may need a little more oversight, but you want somebody who's organized, works well with others, has got good management skills. It could be an NCO. I mean, so there's some great NCOs that they're out there doing it.
Yeah, I've seen CORs from the ranks of staff sergeant all the way up to CW4. It just really depends on make sure you pick the right person and you're not picking a primary staff member or that troublesome soldier that you just want to get out of your AO and that's not the guy that you want to be responsible for your basic life support.
And depending on the scope, it's a good developmental job for somebody for later on. So I read somewhere, because I'm not smart enough to come up with it, but somebody once said, if it's going to hurt to nominate person X to be the COR, person X is the right person. Now, that's easier said than done because it's bigger missions, but COR selection is kind of the key point to all of it. And then commander involvement, because the KO is going to be involved. The contractor is going to be involved. The contractor site lead is going to be involved. But the commander is involved, supervising, providing support to them. Things will go a lot better.
Yep.
So supporting your COR, this is from the reading you had. As a staff officer, as a commander, you've got to make sure that person got the right training at home station and even exercises some training. Have a COR for Porta-John contracts. Have CORs for a lot of things. Just train CORs. Pretend they're doing COR for regular, motor stables maintenance and just come up with something. They're going to make mistakes. Underwrite them. Okay, so it costs $10,000. It's not the end of the world. Underwrite honest mistakes. Fraud, waste, and abuse, totally different. Stupid mistakes, totally different. But if they're trying to do the right thing, support your CORs. Make sure they've got what they need. You're not going to tell a second lieutenant to go run a range all by themselves and not give them the equipment, a good NCO to help them out, all the people they need. Why would being a COR be any different? Make sure that the commander and the leaders, even if it's on the XO or the 3 or 4, takes time on the calendars to get in front of the boss to say, here's the status of our contracts. Here's how things are going. Here's what to do. What do we want to change? It's just as important as some of the other ones. There's going to be conflicts between the boss. I'm sorry, you want to comment?
So I think it's a good point. It is that involvement of that COR and that oversight is key for helping that requiring activity change requirements. And we'll go back to the latrine story. So if he's involved and engaged and he sees that the throughput is not there or that he needs more, he's able to request more. So that involvement, and understanding what the requirement is, and understanding future requirements as they come through. So this story was a CUR that came on site of a FOB. Initially, they only needed X number of porta johns, but then the main body element came through. The CUR was not really engaged, and that unit suffered. That entire unit only used 3 latrines. So that goes back. But ensuring, given that support, propping up that CUR to have the time to go do the training, propping up that CUR to be confident enough to go out and talk to the KO to make those changes, because a CUR doesn't have any authority to change the contract, but he has he's the eyes and ears of the contracting officer that's ensuring that the government's receiving that benefit or that vendor, that contractor is providing, meeting the requirements of the contract, but able to change it if he needs to. So
it's kind of like your staff officer. If he's sitting in a meeting and he's briefing, here are the current status of contracts, and there's a porta john contract, somebody else says, oh, we've got 200 people coming through in a week, we need more porta johns. Then the CO knows that's a cross linkage of staffs we're talking about. It's really important for them to be briefing in front of everybody else, just like the 1 or the 2 or the 4 or the chemo, as opposed to just in a desk side with the office of the boss, because that's when you lose coordination synchronization. And then the KO should provide a copy of the contract. You should have a copy. I've heard too many stories of KO saying, oh, we can't get a copy of the contract. And that's BS. Call the KO, find somebody in the contracting office, they'll get you a copy. They're not, unless it's a secret document, they're not state secrets. Okay, they're very few secret ones. So as a leader, you should read it and make sure your CORs have that.
And having that copy of the contract PWS, and PWS keeps the contractor honest as well as the COR, because not understanding what the requirements of the contract are creates problems, and it also creates opportunities for unauthorized commitments, because once that contractor starts performing outside the scope of that contract, then there's an opportunity there for him to charge the government, or if he's not performing to the scope of the contract.
Right. So these are some organizations you can go see while you're in theater. The Contracting Support Brigade, we already mentioned them. They're operational. They're right there. They do a lot of that theater support contracts. The Contracting Battalion, if you have one that's in the air, sometimes they're in one location, but the contracting team's closer to where you are. Go see them. If it's a systems contract, go to your field support brigades. The contracting officer, the KO, may not be there. They may be back in the States, but the field support brigade has people that can find out who that contracting officer and the COR for those contracts is, because the AFSB is responsible for those. And then link into the theater sustainment OCS cell, because they do their best to maintain visibility of all the contracts in the theater to make sure we're not duplicating and things like that. A lot of units to go to get help, because you don't know what you're doing, and that's fine. Go to these experts. They love to help you to make sure everybody's straight. It makes their life easier and everything's much better. Jay?
Yeah, so typically, if you're operating in a joint environment, so whether it's a JTF or it's an ESC or a TSC, that OCSIC or that OCS integration cell should have a pretty good beat and have that aspect of operational environment to know what capability and capacity is in that theater of operations. They may say, hey, in this JOA, here's your lead service for contract coordination, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. But the bottom line is that capability is built into those staffs to help guide you and give you opportunities to see what contract vehicles out there to support your mission.
Yep. Yeah.
So contractor legal considerations. This is where things can get dicey, but I will tell you that contractors authorized to come to force, your CAF, are not held to the same standards as the military. So what it really boils down to is in that yellow bumper where it says when in doubt, contact legal in your KO. That's generally your best option, because there's a whole slew of things that come into factor when it comes to dealing with contractors overseas. Some things are in the status force, SOFA agreements. Some things are local host nation law type stuff. There's also supplemental guidance that may be put out by that command of that JOA. But there are some tools that the commander can leverage, especially if there's a safety issue or if it's a security issue. Is the commander has that ability to remove contractors from the installation. Commanders and the COR and the KO have that ability to tell that contractor to stop performing, to cease work until further notice. So I'd say my biggest advice would be to reach out to that local legal office or your JAG, as well as your KO, and identify that violation of that offense so it can be adjudicated correctly.
Does the CSB have a legal beagle in the brigade?
They do.
Okay, so that's probably the legal office, the legal person you want to talk to first. And then if they're not around, your regular legal, because not every legal office, say in the ASCC, is going to have a contracting person, but they'll help get you to the right person to get advice.
Yep, correct. So you reach out to that legal and contracting brigade, or reach out to that CT or that battalion, and or reach out to that OCS and say, hey, we have an issue with the contractor, and they'll point you in the right direction.
But their legal status is in the contract. A lot of stuff automatically applies to them, like the media, the Patriot Act, all those different things. UCMJ is very dicey, like you said. When in doubt, with task forces, local nation, all that's taken care of at higher levels and at the tactical level. But if there's problems, call those Muldoons. All right. This is just another example of when you are in the military and you're dealing with contractors, your first thought should be, it's different than in the military. Just if you think that, and then you go to the right expert, you cannot do inspections of your contractors as a commander or as a staff officer. If you want that done, you have to go to the COR or the KO to do that, and they only do it, of course, with the contract. If you go into an office and they're securing their weapons with a foot locker and just a regular lock with a wood foot locker, if that's in course with the contract, that's good enough. If the contract just says secure them, you're good. They don't have to follow the same AR 190-1 rules that are in the Army. But when you loan property, it's done by the contract, not a hand receipt. If the contractor damages government property, the contracting officer does the flipple, the unit does not. We're not going to read all these. That was in your reading. The point is, if something happens with the contract, immediately go to the KO and legal to find out what the right way to do it is, so you don't screw up wasting somebody's time doing a flipple when you can't do anything with it. You just wasted effort from somebody. And you can't step over, because if you say, I want all this stuff laid out for a 10% inventory, they're going to bill you the hours. And that's an unauthorized commitment, because you're not authorized to direct them to lay out equipment. When they have it, they own it. The contract is your accountability document. And the same thing goes with maintenance. That how do you track? How do you account for AMSS data? Who's going to provide the parts? Those are things you have to consider when dealing with contractors. If you get a new infantry platoon for security, going back to our example, you automatically know how the maintenance is done, how the supply is done. That comes within this TACON, OPCON, all those different things. With contracts, it's different. So understand, you don't have to remember any of these things on this slide, but understand the point is, it's different with contractors. And to ensure that you don't do anything wrong, if you have a question, go to your contracting office and say, how do we do this? This is what I want to do. Fair enough? Now let's kind of shift all those gears to get back into our ethics piece of this. How do we make sure that we can stay ethical as we do this? How can we make sure that we reduce fraud, waste, and abuse? I hate the word eliminate, because you never will, but how can you reduce those opportunities for fraud, waste, and abuse? Number one is proper training. Training of your whole staff, not just the COR. Everybody's got to understand what OCS does and what they can and can't do. Two-person validation of receipts. That sounds simple, but there's a big water fraud case where just one person was signing off on all the receipts. And he was signing off, they received millions of bottles when they didn't. That's fraud. But if you have two people validating, it doesn't really have to be anybody else. Just grab a couple of folks, you say, verify that's 1 million bottles or whatever. That helps reduce it. Review the requirements timelines. Don't order, a contract to start on day one when the operation won't start till 10 days later, because you're going to be paying for 10 days. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but a review of that ensures that you assume that your understanding of what you're spending money on. Okay, and that's okay. Just a lot of times we don't really think about it. A recommendation as a battalion commander, my 2-star commander made all the battalion commanders go take COR training. And I thought at the time, well, that's stupid. But in hindsight, when I got back to the unit and I had all these contractors work for me, I'm like, now I understand what they know, what I should be looking for, and how I should lead better to manage it as a battalion commander. So I would really recommend that as an XO, a 3, a staff officer, or as a battalion commander, you become COR certified, not to be a COR, but to understand what the heck they're doing so you understand better what to ask. Check those periodic reports from the CORs. Make sure they're not going native. I saw that when I was in first TSC. It was a master sergeant there. He had gone native, become friends with him. He was just writing stuff. And I said, is this right? I didn't see these reports. I can't change as a staff guy, but now he knows I know. And you get it right. So you got to say, if I was in this unit, because I was just on a Y-ass, if I was in this unit full time, you'd be fired right now. You got 1 month to get it straight, or I'm going to sergeant major, and I'm the 06. So you absolutely have a right and obligation to review those COR periodic reports to make sure things are being reported correctly. When COR folks are doing good stuff and your contracting folks, recognize that. Bring them up in front of somebody when they got something solved real quick. Bring them up, have the boss recognize, say, hey, got this contract turned around, working with the KO. They really did good work. Everybody give them a hand for changing this contract to get it done faster. Inspect the COR just like you would inspect an arms room for security. You develop a checklist of what they should be doing, but inspect that COR to make sure they're doing their quas, they got their reports on time, that they're out and about, that they're doing their quas checks in the right periodic timeline. You can inspect the COR. They work for you. You can't inspect the contractor, but you can inspect that COR every freaking day. Yeah.
And so the COR too is part of that technique in providing that oversight of the COR is checking his file.
Yeah.
The COR is responsible for maintaining record of all of the monthly reports, quas, spot reports, and that nature. So his file should tell a story. If he doesn't have that in place, that's a telltale sign that, hey, he may not be doing proper surveillance.
Sure. And then just never meet with contractors as a leader without the KO, the COR, or somebody from legal being there, because it's somebody else to make sure you're not accidentally making an unauthorized commitment or giving guidance, because that's how the contractor is going to see it, and that you're not obligating the government. It's not that you're bad or they're bad. It's just making sure that everything's above board and nobody accidentally says something they shouldn't say. Very seldom do we do stuff on purpose that's bad. It's just an accidental thing. So that's just a career protection recommendation for you. Jay, any thoughts on that?
So that, going back to unauthorized commitments, sometimes some of those engagements where the contractor notices that hey, there's a more efficient or an efficient way to increase or enhance performance. It may be a legitimate, true, and valid point, but just making sure that you have the COR saying, hey, we've identified, or the contractor has identified this gap or this constraint or this shortfall. We need to address it. So it's not necessarily that they're trying to get over on the government. But sometimes it's a valid concern. It's a valid observation. But having that COR involved, because what will happen is this is probably the only time in the Army where doing the right thing is not always doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so wanting to make that on-the-spot correction, that on-spot fix is not the right thing when it comes in terms of contracts. Everything's got to be done legally through a binding modification that only the KO can obligate, because there's always a cost associated to some type of performance. And so it can be done, but just make sure that you've got your COR and KO involved so we can meet that requirement and meet that.
Just as an example, this is the exact true statement I heard about from the COR firsthand. They're remodeling a building here on post, and the 06 for the requiring activity, who's going to take over the buildings, walking through. COR's not there, the KO's not there. He just happened to be in the building walking through, and the site lead is there, kind of walking him around. He goes in one room. He's like, "Wow, this is really nice." But wouldn't it be nice if we had like a window, something like if we had a window there and another air duct, for ventilation over here? I mean, he just made a comment off the cuff, just kind of thinking to himself. a week later, the COR and the KO got the designs and a cost estimate for those changes that the colonel made to this contract for $50,000. It's like, that's not what we wanted. So just an innocuous, innocent comment. Now, they'd have to pay it because they weren't doing the work, it wasn't approved, but here's the designs the boss wanted. What? Now they had to pay for the time to make those designs, because just be careful. Because the KO there would have said, contractor, don't listen to that. Okay. And there's many others you can do, but those are just some things to kind of help, make sure that things are more ethical and CORs kind of respected. These are some tips for commanders and leaders based on my experience as a commander twice, as an OCS proponent up in G4, and then managing contracts down with First TSC as part of the DMC in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I'm not going to read all these to you, but just look them over. If you can keep these kind of on your desk or in your little files, make sure you do these things. Have routine meetings with your, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, with those people at the bottom. Just make sure everything's going right. You'll be much better off if you kind of sort through these things. Okay.
And one that I would highlight was probably one of the most critical that I've seen either go well or not go well, depending on if they've invested time in this, is prioritizing your requirements. That one to end list, your year for requirements. It happens every year. August, September, sky opens up and pots of money fall out, and now you're in a mad dash to spend all that and get all that money before 1 October. So having that prioritization, that one to end list, and meeting with your KO and that contracting organization, we can help you map out based on procurement acquisition lead time on how long requirements it takes. So there's some expectation management for you and your boss, and so everybody knows how long it takes for a BTC system or how long it will take based on a dollar threshold. But having your prioritization or having that one to end list will certainly help you. It'll benefit you when it comes to end of year spending. And I've seen units not spend all their money because they didn't communicate early on that one end list.
And so that's the class. There's kind of the summary of all the things we talked about, but we hope you got some out of it. I want to thank JJ for coming down from the J4, taking time out of his busy schedule, because you're the only 151 on the entire joint staff, right?
I am.
Yeah, so he's busy. He's working at strategery level. I mean, he's up there looking at OCS planning and policy with Congress and all that good stuff. So I do appreciate your time coming down here to provide that credibility to the video for your insights, because I've never been a 51.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been on the operational side, so I can speak to that. But it's great having a 51 here to provide that third leg of this whole triangle to make these viewers successful at OCS. But I would tell the viewers, if you'll just stand up right now and just raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Don't know anything about OCS, but I know the right people to go talk to get help. If you can admit that you got a problem and you know who to go to, I think OCS will go much better for you in your career, and you'll be a much better manager if I don't know what I'm doing, and that's okay. But there are tons of people out there who are willing and trained and excellent support to help you out. So thank you for your time. All the best to you. Good luck, and see you in the comments.